Welcome back, everyone, to the Halls of History. I am your host, Scott Hall. Hope you all have been enjoying the show so far and that you're ready for some more great NFL history. To recap, my trivia question to you from my previous video. There have been so many great performances in the Super Bowl, from putting up great numbers for the entire game, amazing drives, and key clutch plays, offensive or defensive. But my question, who was the first player to rush for over 150 yards in a Super Bowl? The answer? Franco Harris. The date was January 12, 1975 in New Orleans at wet and slippery Tulane Stadium, and the Pittsburgh Steelers were in their very first Super Bowl. It was the 9th Super Bowl after just getting started between the NFL and the AFL following the 1966 season, and now, of course, the NFC and the AFC. The Minnesota Vikings, led by the Purple People Eaters, with Hall of Famers Alan Page and Carl Eller, as well as the all-time interceptions leader in Paul Krause on defense, with Fran Tarkenton and Chuck Foreman on offense. The Vikings were in the franchise's second Super Bowl and looking to get that first win and ring. Minnesota's defense had been just as dominant as ever in 1974, ranking 3rd in scoring defense and 5th against the run. However, the Steelers had a third-year running back and an offensive line that was tired of hearing about the Purple People Eaters and that nasty run defense. But in the beginning of the game, it didn't look like it was going to be a record-breaking and MVP day. Remember, things were a little wet and slippery out there. Harris lost a yard on his first carry as Pittsburgh went 3 and out on the first drive. The second drive, Harris ran for 4 yards, then actually lost 3 on the next down, but that was nullified by a Steelers penalty. So instead of -3, you get -15. And 2 plays later, the Steelers punted again. By the end of a scoreless first quarter, Harris had 7 carries for 22 yards. You're not exactly thinking MVP at this point. But Pittsburgh managed a 2-0 lead going into the half after a fumble on a handoff resulted in Tarkenton down in the end zone. But just before the half, Harris busted out a 25-yard run with under a minute remaining. A little preview as to what was coming in the second half. On the second play of the third quarter, Harris took off for a 24-yard gain. And then 2 plays later, a 9-yard touchdown. Pittsburgh led 9-0. With the job that the Steel Curtain was doing in making things difficult for the elusive Tarkenton as well as Foreman, the slim lead was more than enough for the Steelers and Franco. Running behind a starting offensive line of left tackle John Kolb, left guard Jim Clack, center Ray Mansfield, right guard Jerry Mullins, and right tackle Gordon Gravel, Harris and Rocky Bleier wore down the Vikings. Franco ran for 101 yards in the second half to total the Super Bowl record 158 for the day. Bleier added 65 yards, and Pittsburgh finished the game with 249 yards on the ground, just 3 shy of tying the team's Super Bowl record of 252 set by the Dallas Cowboys in Super Bowl VI. The Steelers won their first Super Bowl and were able to hand that Lombardi trophy to their dear owner, Art Rooney. Franco's MVP day was actually his highest rushing total to that point of his career, regular or postseason, and it came in the biggest game of his career, his very first Super Bowl. His record has since been broken, but he has only been passed by just 3 players. In January of 1983, the Diesel, John Riggins, rumbled for 166 yards in a win over the Dolphins in Super Bowl XVII. The very next year, Marcus Allen, running with the Knight, took off for 191 yards in the win over Washington in Super Bowl XVIII. And then finally, Timmy Smith busted out a Super Bowl record 204 yards as Washington dominated Denver in Super Bowl XXII. Washington was kind of a theme running there, weren't they? Franco coming through in clutch moments was not exactly a new thing. He started at Penn State, getting to play against big-time opponents and in bowl games, and then was selected in the first round of the 1972 draft by a franchise that had never won a playoff game and had only been to the playoffs just once in its first 37 years of existence. Pittsburgh had more losses, fewer points, and more points scored against them than any other franchise that had been around for that long. Now, with Franco in the backfield as a rookie in 1972, Pittsburgh went from 6-8 the year before to 11-3 and won the AFC Central for the first time. This team had a growing nasty defense, as well as an offense that now had someone to run the ball that could wear teams down and drive toward greatness. So many Hall of Famers coming from that squad. And of course, I had mentioned in my previous video that Franco was involved in what was voted the greatest play in NFL history, the Immaculate Reception. The Steelers just celebrated the 50th anniversary of that legendary play, and it is one that can really trigger some arguments depending on who you cheer for. December 23rd, 1972, the Steelers trailing 7-6 in Three River Stadium to the Oakland Raiders. Time winding down, under a minute to go, and 4th and 10 at their own 40. Terry Bradshaw, as he said, sees a streaking Frenchie Fuqua and fired a shot as Horace Jones and Tony Klein were just bearing down in his face, both of them 6'3", so very good-sized defensive linemen. He didn't see anything after that, just heard the cheers. And one great thing that I saw about this play going back to the NFL 75th anniversary video that NFL Films produced was Bradshaw saying that when he heard the crowd, he thought, man, I must have done something great. I must have put that ball in there perfectly. He's thinking, I'm going to be on a Wheaties box. I'm going to get all these endorsements. Everything's going to be great. Didn't even know till he got back to the sidelines that it was Franco who'd finished off the play. But to go back to that, however, there was a deflection after a massive collision between Fuqua and the assassin Jack Tatum. Then there was Harris. Right place, right time, to make a shoe top grab and race for the end zone on what became a 60-yard game-winning touchdown. Now, I will admit this. I never knew there was a controversy to this play until the summer of 2004. Everything I had ever watched to this point just celebrated the play and what happened. And then, of course, 2 years later, the Steelers dynasty going into full launch. However, that summer of 2004, I was working a temp job while off from school with Cisco, the food delivering company, and it was in their brand new warehouse near Front Royal, Virginia, which is right down the road from my hometown. I was working with a guy named Lee King, and we were putting up the labels, the stickers on all the racks. So a summer of driving around in a scissor lift, we were listening to music, having great conversations. We were pretty much by ourselves out there in the warehouse. It was actually a lot of fun. Well, we got to talking about that play, the Immaculate Reception. And Lee informed me about how, at that time, if an offensive player touched a pass, that another offensive player could not be the first one to touch that deflected ball. Essentially, if touched by Fuqua, then the play is over. But if touched by Tatum, game on. Seems like a strange rule, doesn't it? Because obviously now anybody who deflects the ball, you can pretty much go ahead and catch it if it's tipped. But that puts into question, did Tatum touch the ball? Did Fuqua? Or did both of them? The argument will probably go on for the rest of time. I learned a lot from Lee, and not just about the Immaculate Reception. I do miss our conversations. I love listening to the old players who were involved in this play talking about it. From Harris, to Bradshaw, to Fuqua, to even Raiders linebacker Phil Villapiano. He is one of the best interviews. Love watching that guy. He said that he was clipped by a Steeler, so he couldn't quite make the tackle on Harris. And then there was the whole deal about the referees talking to Art McNally upstairs. What happened with that conversation? Was it touched? Did Harris actually catch the ball? Did it maybe touch the ground? Was Villapiano clipped? No matter what side you go with here, it is still one of, if not the biggest moment in NFL history because of what it signified. I mean, think about this. If the Steelers win that game, but then continue to struggle or be also-rans in the years that followed, don't go on this dynasty run, I don't believe that play would be as celebrated as it is. But Pittsburgh went on to win 4 Super Bowls in the decade of the 70s. And if you start from Harris's rookie season, 1970 through 1979, an 8-season span, the squad from the Steel City won 88 regular season games, 14 postseason games. Franco was a major catalyst of that success. This soft-spoken running back from Fort Dix, New Jersey, finished his career with an NFL record 8 1,000-yard seasons and 5 years with double-digit touchdowns. He was a Pro Bowler every year from 1972 through 1980 and was the 1972 Offensive Rookie of the Year. After playing 12 years for the Steelers, Pittsburgh let him go after the 83 season. Franco had just run for 1,007 yards, his first 1,000-yard season since 1979, but averaged only 3.6 yards per carry. The Seattle Seahawks signed him in 1984, and Franco played only 8 games, gaining just 170 yards. He wanted to keep playing after the 84 season, but unfortunately, his incredible career came to a close. Now, when Franco Harris retired, he was the 3rd all-time leading rusher in NFL history with 12,120, trailing only Walter Payton and Jim Brown. Franco was one of just 5 players to reach the 10,000-yard milestone. He now ranks 15th and is one of 31 rushers over 10,000 yards. He was also 3rd all-time in rushing touchdowns with 91, behind only Brown and John Riggins. But if you look at the postseason, Franco was the man. He remains the all-time leader in Super Bowl rushing yards with 354, and he held the mark for playoff yards at 1,556 until Emmitt Smith finally passed Franco in Smith's final playoff game in January of 2000. At 6'2" and 230 pounds, Franco was a big-time back for the big-time stage. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility, receiving his gold jacket in 1990, getting to go in with his teammate, Jack Lambert. Since Franco's untimely passing on December 20th, just 3 days before the 50th anniversary of that most famous play, and when his number 32 was going to be retired, there have been so many incredible stories and memories that people have shared. And from all sides, even Raiders fans, even fans of teams that obviously hated the Steelers. One that I wasn't completely aware of was the friendship between Franco and Phil Villapiano. They got to become very close friends because of Villapiano's parents helping Franco's mother at a ceremony in New Jersey, and both of them being from New Jersey as well as both being Italian. I knew they had gotten together a few times to talk about the Immaculate Reception through NFL films and Peyton's Places, but to find out that Villapiano brought Franco to a Raiders game and made him an honorary member of the Black Hole, that's just fantastic. And that Franco would call Phil every December 23rd to ask him what he was doing on that day back in 1972, that's amazing and very touching as well. Sports can really bring people together from anywhere and everywhere, and it is possible to become friends with someone who is a huge rival on the field. You remember all those discussions, they all talked about how much they hated each other when they got to play, both those teams. If you haven't seen the story from ESPN on Franco's and Phil's friendship, you really need to. I have put the link to the video and the story in the description below. Make sure you click on that. Everyone talks about how friendly Franco was off the field and how much he cared about people, and especially Pittsburgh. But here's another story for you from when Franco actually made a visit to Winchester, Virginia, which is right next to my hometown, up here in the very top of Virginia. This story is from the Facebook page Winchester Tales, and it was posted on December 20th, the morning that Franco passed away. From May 2nd, 1985, and the Apple Blossom Festival, which is always that first weekend in May here in Winchester. That morning, he was up early at the Winchester Quality Inn. As he sat up in bed, he thought about his career and the future. It was May of 1985, and Franco Harris had been released by his beloved Pittsburgh Steelers and had finished his career with the Seattle Seahawks. He gave the Steelers 12 incredible seasons, and for this 35-year-old superstar, his career was coming to an end. His agent, Bart Byer, had called the week before the festival to let Harris know that no teams had made any offers, and it looked like retirement may be the best route. In reality, the only route. Harris showered, got dressed, and waited in the lobby for the car that would take him to the festival's sports breakfast at the Lee Jackson dining room. Dallas Cowboys star running back Tony Dorsett saw Harris, came over, and hugged the former rival. Little did Dorsett know, he would retire 3 years later due to injuries in the 1988 season when he ended up actually playing for the Denver Broncos. But that's the fate of a running back. Beloved when you're on top, discarded when no longer productive. They were friends, on and off the field. Franco Harris was always friendly to his fans, always willing to sign an autograph or take a picture. And on this day, he needed his fans more than they needed him. When Harris entered the banquet room at the Lee Jackson, the crowd went crazy. They all had seen that slow motion reel of Harris and the Immaculate Reception in the AFC Divisional Playoff game on December 23, 1972. It had undeniably sealed Franco Harris's name in the annals of the NFL's greatest plays, and they could never take that away from him. As Harris took that stage in front of so many Winchester fans, he understood that he didn't have anything left to prove, nor should he be disappointed that he could not continue. He gave it all, and they loved him for it. The next day, as Harris rode on the back of a convertible car, he graciously waved as he meandered through the crowded streets of Winchester. As if in slow motion, just like that play, he could see the sea of Steelers jerseys all along Washington Street. People trying to get a glimpse of a superstar, a legend. Franco Harris died today at the age of 72. I'm honored that I was one of those kids along Washington Street that day in May of 1985. I can see him clearly. He was huge, a massive superhero in a suit. I believe Winchester came into his life at the moment where he needed it most. I would like to think Winchester had a little part in letting Franco Harris know he was such an important part of our lives growing up, and we loved him. And a comment on that post from Doug Loy. I was a deputy with Frederick County that day, assigned to do celebrity escorts for Apple Blossom, taking them from one function to another. One evening at a celebrity dinner, we deputies were given a room to eat and watch television. After a while, in walks Franco Harris. He sat down with us, watched a little TV, and chatted as if we were neighborhood friends. He was very friendly and humble. While I was never a Steelers follower, I will never forget that time. He is a legend. You know, Franco said that he never tired of talking to people about the Immaculate Reception or posing for photos and signing autographs. And, why not? That was one of those moments that really springboarded one of the greatest runs since the merger in the NFL. Now, I never personally got to meet Franco Harris. In fact, actually, if I had been at that parade in May of 1985, I'm not going to remember it. I was too little. But although one year for the Hall of Fame inductions in Canton, Ohio, me and several friends, we would try to go every year if we could. I did see Franco in passing from a little distance. Fans yelled his name, and he walked by with a big smile, shaking hands and trying to stop for a few photos and a few autographs, while the people who were with him were trying to shuttle him off to wherever he was supposed to be next. You know, Franco wasn't the flashiest runner. And other than his time in the playoffs, he didn't have the greatest stats. You know, he didn't put up the numbers that you saw that Walter Payton, of course, later on Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders did. However, his impact was undeniable. And of course, you can't forget about Franco's Italian army and that call of him galloping in on a white horse to carry Pittsburgh to victory. Rest in peace, Franco Harris, as another star has been called home, and no one will ever wear number 32 again for the Pittsburgh Steelers, as it should be. Okay, folks, are you ready for my next NFL trivia question to get you set for my next video? All right, well, here we go. This season, there are already 6 quarterbacks who have thrown for over 4,000 yards. And there's the possibility of maybe at least 4 more joining them. Now, we have gotten so used to seeing the football flying all over the place from quarterbacks and putting up ridiculous numbers. So many over 4,000. We've had some over 5,000. It's become so commonplace. And going into week 17 of this season, 2 games remaining on the schedule, a QB has thrown for over 4,000 yards 214 times in NFL history. But my question to you is this. who was the first quarterback in league history to surpass the 4,000-yard barrier? Couple of hints for you. He did it in a 14-game schedule, and a season later would be known for leading one of the biggest upsets in pro football history. Think you know the answer? Drop your guesses in the comments below, and stay tuned next week for the next episode of the Halls of History. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year, and enjoy watching a lot of football this weekend, everybody.